Welcome back, everybody. Today's deep dive, it's a little unsettling, to be honest with you.
Oh,
Yeah, I think it's something that's been keeping a lot of us up at night.
okay.
Can a democracy really fall apart that fast?
Well, history tells us that it certainly can,
Yeah,
and we have some really fascinating source material to help us understand that today.
right. We're going deep on this one with how Hitler dismantled a democracy in 53 days.
Wow.
And what's really interesting about this is some of the anxieties we've been seeing from comments on that Aurora article.
Yeah.
People are genuinely concerned about how fragile democracies seem to be,
Right, and those concerns are valid.
especially in the face of things like economic hardship and political polarization.
Exactly. If we rewind the clock back to Germany in the 1930s,
Okay.
the country was just crippled by war debts, just devastated by the terms of the Versailles Treaty.
Yeah.
And they were reeling from this massive economic crisis.
Right.
And on top of all of that, rampant political instability.
It's almost like you're describing the world today.
Well, I mean, does any of this sound familiar?
It's like looking in a mirror, almost. It's really striking how similar those pressures are.
Right.
The economic anxieties, the political instability. It's almost like we're living through a cautionary tale.
Absolutely.
So how did Hitler manage to take advantage of all this uncertainty?
I think it's helpful to think of it this way. Hitler was really a master of narrative.
Okay.
He was a master storyteller.
Okay.
He presented himself as this strong leader, offering really simple solutions to very complex problems.
Right.
And he was really good at appealing to this nation that was absolutely desperate for change.
So he's playing the part of the savior almost.
Yes.
Promising to restore Germany to its former glory.
Exactly.
But, he didn't always succeed, right? I mean, I was reading in our Germany 1933 source that he actually tried to pull off a coup back in 1923.
He did.
And it failed spectacularly. The beer hall push, I think they called it.
That's right. Yeah, that was a total disaster for Hitler. But
Yeah.
here's the really fascinating thing. He learned from that failure.
Okay.
He realized that trying to seize power through brute force just wasn't going to work.
Makes sense.
He needed a different approach.
Okay.
He needed a more subtle legal path to power.
So kind of working within the system to break the system.
Exactly.
And that's where all that image trolling that you talked about comes into play.
Right.
He's got to craft a very specific narrative to pull this off.
Absolutely. It's funny you should mention that because the Germany 1933 source even talks about these cigarette cards that they used to circulate with his picture on them.
Oh, wow. Really?
And they were portraying him as, youthful and vigorous compared to these older, more traditional politicians.
Oh, so they're trying to really control that image, make him seem like the fresh face,
Exactly.
the new blood.
Yes.
Wow.
It's really brilliant propaganda when you think about it.
Yeah,
Because these cards were everywhere.
sure.
They were circulating throughout German society, and they were incredibly effective at shaping public perception.
It makes you think about the narratives that we're all susceptible to today.
Absolutely.
I mean, how are our perceptions being shaped by, the media we consume?
Right.
The things we see every day.
It's a great question.
But getting back to Hitler, how did he manage to dismantle an entire democracy through legal means? I mean, that's a pretty impressive feat.
It is. It is. Well, the real turning point, I think, was the Reichstag Fire in 1933.
Okay.
Now, this event remains shrouded in mystery.
Yep.
We still don't know exactly what happened, but the Nazis immediately seized upon it as evidence of a communist threat.
Oh, interesting.
And they used it to justify this decree that suspended basic civil liberties.
Wow. So they're using fear tactics already.
Exactly. Exactly. And in fact, there's this really chilling quote from Hermann Goering,
Okay.
who was one of the high-ranking Nazis. And he supposedly said, upon seeing the fire, this is the beginning of the communist revolt.
Oh, wow.
Like he was just waiting for it.
So are we saying that they used this single event, potentially one that they orchestrated themselves, to justify seizing even more power?
It's certainly possible.
It's like they were just waiting for any excuse to start eroding democratic norms.
Well, it's a classic tactic of authoritarian regimes, isn't it?
Yeah.
You manufacture a crisis, you exploit the fear and chaos, and then you consolidate power under the guise of restoring order.
Oh, that's scary. And so that's where the Enabling Act comes in.
That's exactly right.
Right.
So the Enabling Act was this law passed by the Reichstag,
Okay.
and it essentially gave Hitler dictatorial powers for 4 years.
Wow.
And he was able to push it through because everybody was so afraid after the Reichstag fire.
Of course, yeah.
And he had silenced any opposition through intimidation and violence.
So under the guise of legality, Hitler was able to completely dismantle democracy from the inside.
That's exactly what happened.
It's a chilling example of just how fragile these systems can be.
It really is.
It makes you wonder, are there similar things happening today?
I think that's a question worth exploring, and it brings us to a figure who had become increasingly influential in certain circles. Curtis Yarvin.
Yarvin, I'm not familiar.
Yeah, so Yarvin, sometimes he writes under the pseudonym Mencius Moldbug, is a blogger and a software engineer.
Okay.
And he advocates for this radical restructuring of government.
Okay.
He calls it Caesarism,
Okay.
which is essentially a form of one-man rule, kind of disguised as legitimate governance.
So what, he wants to bring back, like, Roman emperors?
He believes that these traditional democratic systems are just too inefficient.
Okay.
They're too prone to gridlock.
Yeah.
And that what we really need is a single decisive leader
Okay.
to enact any kind of meaningful change.
So he's proposing a system where one person has absolute power.
That's essentially it.
It sounds a bit, I don't know, dictatorial, if you ask me.
It's certainly a controversial viewpoint.
Yeah.
But what's interesting is how Yarvin's ideas have actually gained traction among certain individuals in positions of power and influence.
Really? Like who?
Well, J.D. Vance, for example,
Oh, wow.
our current vice president,
Yeah.
he's openly expressed admiration for Yarvin's strategic thinking.
Hmm.
He's even suggested that Trump, during his presidency, could have been more effective if he had adopted this more Caesarist approach to governing.
Wow. That's a little concerning. Are there any other, prominent figures who align with this ideology?
Well, another example would be Elon Musk.
Okay.
Now, while he hasn't explicitly endorsed Yarvin's ideas,
Right.
some of his actions, particularly his control over media narratives, really do seem to align with some aspects of Yarvin's thinking.
Wait, hold on. Are we saying that Elon Musk is some kind of modern-day Hitler?
No, not at all.
Okay.
I think it's really important to avoid drawing these direct equivalences.
Okay.
But what's fascinating and perhaps a little bit unsettling is how certain themes from Hitler's rise to power are kind of echoing in contemporary discourse.
Okay.
Things like the manipulation of media, the exploitation of fear and anxieties,
Yeah.
calls for a strong leader to bypass these traditional democratic processes. These are all elements that resonate with both Hitler's tactics and Yarvin's theories.
I'm starting to see the connection.
Right.
And it's a lot to process, to be honest.
Yeah.
This is definitely giving me some food for thought.
Absolutely.
But, if Hitler was using those cigarette cards to kind of shape public perception, what are we dealing with today?
That's a great question.
What are the modern day equivalents? I mean, how are these narratives being shaped and spread around today?
I think that brings us to the role of media and technology in the 21st century.
All right, let's unpack that, because that's where things start to feel really, really relevant to our lives, don't they?
They really do. So, think about it this way. Hitler had his propaganda machine.
Really?
His methods of controlling the flow of information.
Yeah.
But today we have social media, algorithms,
Right.
this 24/7 news cycle that is just constantly shaping public opinion and influencing our behavior.
So you're talking about the power of these platforms, things like Twitter, right?
Exactly.
And how someone like Elon Musk, with all of his reach and influence, can essentially control the narrative, right?
Precisely. I mean, Musk has this incredible ability to amplify certain voices,
Yeah.
suppress others,
Right.
and even shape the very algorithms that determine what we see and what we don't. That's a scary thought. It is. It is.
I mean, that's a lot of power concentrated in the hands of one person. It makes you wonder, is that power being used responsibly?
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it?
It is. I mean, are we getting a diversity of viewpoints? Or is this just pushing one particular agenda?
Right. And that's something we all need to be thinking about. We can't just passively consume information anymore.
Right.
We have to be critical thinkers.
Right.
We have to question the sources of the information. We have to understand the motivations behind these messages that we're bombarded with every day.
Right.
And we need to seek out diverse perspectives.
I mean, it's good advice just for life in general, right?
Absolutely.
Don't believe everything you see on the internet.
Right.
Check your sources. Think for yourself.
Exactly. Exactly.
This reminds me of something I was reading in that WBOR article that was talking about how Elon Musk has really been, inserting himself more and more into Washington.
Oh, really?
Yeah, apparently he's been meeting with lawmakers,
Huh.
lobbying for policies that benefit his companies,
I see.
and even using Twitter to criticize politicians that don't agree with his views.
That's pretty significant. It really speaks to this growing influence of these wealthy individuals
Right.
in shaping political discourse and policy.
Yeah.
And it raises some serious questions about accountability.
Yeah.
About transparency. What does it mean for the average citizen if somebody like Elon Musk can just buy access to policymakers
Right.
and use their platform to sway public opinion?
It's almost like we've gone back to, these patronage systems of the past,
I think there are some definite echoes there.
where wealthy individuals had this outsized influence on political leaders.
And it really underscores the need for strong democratic institutions,
Yes.
that can act as a check against this type of influence.
So we've got these historical parallels. We've got Hitler's control over the media.
Right.
We've got, the rise of these figures like Yarvin advocating for radical shifts in government.
Right.
And this growing influence of wealthy individuals like Elon Musk.
Absolutely.
I mean, it's a lot to take in, and to be honest, it's kind of terrifying.
I understand why you feel that way. It can be very unsettling to see these patterns and to see how history sometimes rhymes with the present.
But is it really fair to compare what's happening today with what happened in Nazi Germany?
Well, it's crucial to avoid those direct comparisons.
Right.
We're not saying that history is repeating itself beat for beat.
Okay.
But we do see some disturbing echoes,
Right.
some warning signs that I think we need to pay attention to.
Okay.
Things like the erosion of democratic norms, the manipulation of information,
Right.
the concentration of power in the hands of a select few.
Yeah.
These are all trends that should give us pause.
So what do we do? How do we protect ourselves against this stuff? I mean, how do we safeguard our own democracy?
Well, I think the first step is just being aware. We need to understand how these tactics work,
Okay.
how they were used in the past, and how they're being used today.
So educate ourselves. Got it. What else?
Knowledge is power, right? And secondly, we need to be critical thinkers. Don't just passively accept the information you're given.
Right.
Question everything. Think about the source. Look for evidence.
Right.
And be very skeptical of these narratives that seem too simple or too convenient
Okay.
or maybe even too emotionally charged.
Right. Right.
And finally, we need to be engaged citizens.
Okay.
Participate in the process, hold our leaders accountable,
Right.
support organizations that are working to protect these democratic values.
Make our voices heard.
Exactly. Democracy is not a spectator sport.
Right.
It requires active participation.
I like that. I like that a lot. So bringing this back to our initial question, can a democracy really unravel that quickly? I mean, based on everything we've discussed today, the answer seems to be a resounding yes.
I think so. History has shown us time and again that it's possible, even alarmingly easy,
Right.
for democracies to crumble under the weight of fear, division, and complacency.
Yeah. It's a sobering thought, but history also teaches us that we're not powerless. Right? We can learn from the past.
Absolutely.
We can recognize these warning signs, and we can take action to protect our freedoms and our democracy.
I completely agree. I think that's a message of hope and empowerment.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Well, thank you for joining us on this deep dive.
My pleasure.
It's been a heavy conversation, but I think a crucial one. We hope you'll continue to explore these ideas, stay informed, and stay engaged. And remember, the future of democracy is in our hands.
Very well said. It's interesting you should say vigilance.
Yeah.
Because I was reading that Germany 1933 source earlier, and it's amazing how many warning signs there were before Hitler actually took power.
Really?
But people just ignored them or, just thought, it's not a big deal.
Right.
It won't get that bad.
Yeah.
It's a theme we see throughout history.
Oh, yeah.
People just don't grasp how sneaky authoritarianism is.
Yeah.
It's these tiny changes,
Right.
this erosion of norms.
Like a frog in boiling water.
Exactly. And they think, it'll never get that far. But history shows us it can. And it does if you're not careful.
So how do we spot those warning signs?
Well, some big ones are demonizing your opponents,
Okay.
shutting down anyone who disagrees,
Okay.
spreading lies,
Right.
making people lose trust in institutions, and of course, all the power ending up with just a few people.
It's like a checklist for, I don't know, democratic backsliding, right?
Yeah. If you see a bunch of these happening, that's when you gotta worry.
Time to sound the alarm.
But we gotta watch ourselves too, not just the politicians.
What do you mean?
Are we being civil?
Right.
Are we calling out misinformation, even from our own side? Are we participating in democracy?
It's not just about blaming the leaders then, is it?
Nope. It's on all of us to protect this thing.
Democracy is a team sport.
Absolutely. It needs everyone on the field actively playing or else.
It falls apart. So, back to our big question.
Yeah.
Can a democracy really go that fast? Based on all this, the answer's got to be yes.
It is. History's pretty clear on that. It can happen surprisingly easily.
When fear takes over.
When we're divided.
When we think it'll always be there.
Exactly.
Makes you think, huh?
It does.
But it's not all doom and gloom, right?
Oh, not at all. History shows we're not helpless. We can learn from this.
We can see those warning signs.
And we can fight for our freedom. Not just for us, but for the future, too.
Powerful stuff. Really makes you think.
It should. This is important.
Well, thanks for joining us on this deep dive, everyone.
Yeah, thanks for listening.
It was heavy, sure, but we needed to have it.
We did.
Keep thinking about this stuff, stay informed, stay active. That's how we make a difference.
Couldn't have said it better myself.
And remember, history might not repeat exactly, but it rhymes. So let's learn from those rhymes and protect what we've got.
Hear, hear.